The night above Holy Terra had not changed in 10,000 years. The constellations were fixed, catalogued, and sanctified by the priesthood of the Mechanicus. The stars of the throne world did not wander. They obeyed. But then, without warning, the heavens disobeyed. Astronomers stationed on the orbital platforms first noticed the distortion, tiny at first, then swelling like a heartbeat in the void. One by one, stars shifted out of alignment, as if dragged by an unseen hand. The constellations twisted, their sacred order bending into strange, unfamiliar patterns. Across the psychic web of the Imperium, astropaths screamed in unison. Gravity rippled through the warp and the materium alike, bending light itself. The moon's tides surged. Orbital sensors fractured under impossible readings. Some claimed they saw the stars weep red dust as though bleeding from the sky. In the imperial palace, alarms thundered through the ancient halls. Servitors collapsed, their cogitators overloading. Adepts of the Astra Telepathica clawed at their own eyes, crying that something vast was falling, something older than the warp, heavier than a god's promise. Above them all, the black gulf of space convulsed. The void itself folded inward like a wound trying to close. Within that wound burned a shape, a crimson spark dragging a tail of broken light, falling faster than any ship could travel. The High Lords looked to the Emperor's statue for comfort and found none, for even the throne flickered, as if the master of mankind himself paused to watch. Through the telescopes of the orbital spires, the object grew clearer.
Not a meteor, not debris. It burned with deliberate fury, like a soul refusing to die.
And behind it trailed something far stranger, a gravitational wake that pulled fragments of rock, derelict ships and even satellites into orbit around it.
As though the void itself bowed before its passage. Every equation of the Mechanicus failed.
Every theory of the Navis Imperialis collapsed. What they witnessed should not have been possible. A being was falling, not from another world, but from beyond time itself. And as it entered the solar system, the stars above Terra shifted once more, as though making room for the return of a long-forgotten king. The object entered the Sol system like a divine judgment. The void screamed around it, its surface burning with colors no human eye had ever catalogued. It was not fire that cloaked it, but raw friction against the fabric of reality, matter and gravity warring to contain what should never have existed. Every auspex, every scanning array, every imperial probe in range died the moment they turned their gaze upon it.
Vox channels filled with static, a deep, rhythmic pulse like the beating of a god's heart.
Across the system, psychers convulsed, their eyes rolling white as they clutched their temples, whispering the same word over and over, Radahn. As the meteor drew near, its veil of light peeled away, revealing the truth. It was not stone, not ship, but a form encased in ancient armor the color of dying suns. Crimson plates scorched by aeons of war, gilded edges cracked and blackened. Twin blades, monstrous in scale, dragged behind it like the tails of comets, and around it drifted fragments of shattered constellations, meteors, dust, and broken moons locked in orbit by the sheer weight of its gravity. The entity fell toward Jupiter, its descent warping time itself. The gas giant's storm belts twisted into spirals of violet and gold.
Lightning the size of continents leapt upward to meet it, as if the planet recognized the returning of a god.
When the impact came, it was no simple strike. It was a symphony of annihilation. The collision tore through the upper moons in a chain of detonations. Ganymede split at its equator. Io's molten seas were flung into orbit. The shock wave raced outward, an expanding halo of force that rippled all the way to Terra. Even the walls of the Imperial Palace groaned, as if the planet itself bowed under the weight of the event. From orbit, the explosion looked like a new sun igniting beside Jupiter. The Mechanicus watched in horror as gravity itself bent inward, drawing wreckage, dust, and flame into a single orbiting sphere. In the heart of that storm, sensors caught glimpses, frames of movement, a figure walking through plasma and ash, unharmed. Servitors began to chant in corrupted binary.
Astropaths wept blood.
The warp echoed with the phantom sound of marching hooves, slow, steady, deliberate. The Emperor's tarot burned white-hot in the hands of his prophets. On every world connected to Terra by psychic resonance, one word echoed across 1 billion dreams. It came not from the warp, but from the void between it and the stars, ancient, sorrowful, undeniable, Radahn. And as that name spread like a ripple through the immaterium, gravity stilled. The stars around the solar system dimmed, as if kneeling in recognition of the fallen general who once commanded them to halt. For the first time in centuries, the halls of the Imperial Palace knew silence. The constant hum of machinery, the chants of the Adeptus Custodes, the endless drone of the Mechanicus choir, all had fallen still. Even the distant roar of Terra's storm seemed to fade, swallowed by a pressure no mortal ear could define. The Emperor felt it long before his servants could name it. The shock of the impact on Jupiter was a whisper compared to the resonance now vibrating through the warp. It was not corruption.
Not chaos, not even the echo of a god.
It was gravity made conscious, pure, ancient, unyielding, something that existed before the Immaterium learned to speak. Deep within the Golden Throne's sanctum, the Emperor's eyes opened. The Astronomicon faltered, flickering like a dying star before stabilizing again. A dozen custodes knelt instantly, their armor clattering in perfect unison. No words were spoken. They felt his thought ripple through them like sunlight through glass. Across the inner chambers, alarms pulsed in restrained tones. Servitors reported seismic interference from the Jovian orbit, unclassified energy spikes, and gravitational distortion beyond calculable limits. The readings made no sense, mass fluctuating like a heartbeat, time dilation bending in local pockets, spatial curvature forming concentric layers around the moon's debris field. The Fabricator General's emissaries begged for permission to deploy containment fleets, to probe, to dissect, to understand, but no sanction came. Only a command, a single, silent impulse that cut through every transmission. Wait. From the sanctum of the Sigillite archives to the vaults of the Ordo Malleus, whispers spread. Could it be a weapon of the dark Mechanicum?
A shard of an old god?
Or worse, an echo of the Emperor himself, split and cast into the void. Malcador's successor, aged and trembling, dared to approach the throne room. When he reached its gates, he found the air trembling, thick as molten gold. Behind those doors, the Emperor was watching, not through eyes of flesh, but through the fabric of existence. He saw Jupiter burning. He saw the shattered moons, the storm of light and dust, and the thing that walked within it. He saw a warrior's form, colossal, regal, broken, a being wrapped in armor from another cosmos, yet familiar in its defiance of natural law. It bent gravity as easily as a man bends his knee. It walked where flame could not live. It was power given shape, will given mass. And the Emperor understood. This was no demon, no construct of the warp. This was something else, something born from stars that knew no warp to begin with. The thought stirred something long dormant within him, curiosity. He rose from the throne, not in body, but in light. The custodes felt his command ripple through their armor. 1,000 golden warriors moved as one. Vox networks flared with orders. Battleships were redirected. A new name was spoken among the elite guard, though few understood its weight: the fallen star. On the moonlit ruins of Jupiter, a crimson figure still stood in the crater, surrounded by orbiting fragments of moons like a crown of stone. The Emperor's voice, soft and terrible, filled the minds of his captains. "Go, find what has fallen. Bring it to me." And for the first time since the Great Crusade, the Emperor of mankind looked to the heavens not in command, but in anticipation. The custodes departed Terra in silence. No hymns, no fanfare, no light of parade, only the whisper of purpose that even they could not fully name. Their ship, the Eternum Vigil, burned through the void like a spear of gold, slicing across the dark toward the wounded moons of Jupiter. What waited there was no battlefield of men. It was the corpse of gravity itself. When they entered orbit, the readings defied comprehension. Whole continents of Ganymede drifted in the void, circling each other like planets in miniature. Fragments of ice and stone spun in precise geometric patterns, orbiting invisible points as if obeying a will. The usual laws of mass and distance had unraveled. There was no up, no down, only the quiet dance of debris suspended in absolute stillness. The custodes advanced cautiously, their ship's engines screaming as they fought the pull of unseen tides. Vox channels filled with static and low groans, like the dying breath of a planet. Magnetic readings spiked to infinity and fell to zero within the same heartbeat. Servitors overloaded. The machine spirits of their armor moaned in confusion. Through the ship's viewports, they saw him. A single figure kneeling at the heart of the largest crater, surrounded by a swirling halo of shattered moonrock and molten metal. He did not move, yet the orbit of each fragment obeyed him, each shard turning in slow, reverent motion. His armor was the color of dying suns, crimson and black, scarred by centuries of war. Great blades rested at his sides, half buried in the dust like monuments to forgotten battles. The custodes descended in silence, the Eternum Vigil anchoring above the crater's rim. The landing cracked the frozen soil and sent debris drifting upward instead of down. Every step they took felt wrong, as though the ground could no longer decide which way to pull. One custodian reached out, and his hand brushed against a fragment of broken stone that refused to fall back to the earth. It hung in the air between them, trembling like a living thing. At the center of it all, the warrior stirred. A tremor rippled through the field, spreading like thunder beneath the surface. The orbiting debris shifted, forming a spiral around him. Dust rose in slow, graceful arcs. The custodes raised their guardian spears, forming a defensive circle. Then the figure moved. He rose with deliberate calm, the dust cascading upward as though gravity itself bowed in greeting. His hair flowed like molten copper. His eyes opened, not with light, but with gravity, pulling even vision toward them. The weight of his presence crushed the air. Weapons locks failed. Servo motors froze. 1,000 alarms whispered warnings of impossible mass fluctuation. One custodian tried to speak a litany of containment, but his voice broke as his feet left the ground. The warrior stood fully now, a titan made flesh. He looked around, not in rage, but in confusion, as if waking from a dream that had lasted eternity. The twin swords on his back glowed faintly, heat radiating from the runes etched into their steel. He breathed once, and the sound echoed like collapsing stars. One of the custodes dared to step forward. He raised a palm in peace, invoking the Emperor's name. For a heartbeat, it seemed to calm the air. Then the wind reversed. A surge of invisible power erupted outward, slamming the golden warriors backward. Entire fragments of moonstone shattered into dust, drawn into a swirling vortex. The custodes held their ground by sheer will, digging their boots into the trembling soil. And through the storm, the giant looked up, past them, past the ruins, toward the blue glimmer of distant terror. His voice rolled across the void, not through air, but through gravity itself, a sound that vibrated through ships and stars alike. A single word.
Not a question. A memory. Where am I?
The custodes froze, awestruck. They had found the fallen star. But they did not yet understand that what they had awakened was not a weapon, nor a monster, but a king who had once stopped the stars themselves. The dust hung in orbit around the crater like a shroud of broken light. The custodes, veterans of 1,000 campaigns, had never seen anything like it. Gravity bent and released in slow pulses, as though the world itself breathed with the rhythm of the fallen being before them. Even their auto-senses could not agree on scale. One moment he seemed the size of a space marine, the next as vast as a titan standing among them. The crimson figure swayed once, as if struggling against the pull of unseen tides, then dropped to one knee. The weight of his body alone cracked the bedrock beneath him. The custodes readied their weapons again, unsure whether to defend or to kneel. But the giant's head bowed, not in defiance, but exhaustion. When they approached, the air thickened. Every step toward him felt like wading through an ocean. Their armor groaned. Vox channels stuttered with interference. Servitors overloaded and fell still, their mechanical hearts unable to bear the pressure. Closer now, the custodes could see his face beneath the scorched helm. It was strangely human, noble, scarred, and weary. His hair, long and red as rusted copper, floated weightlessly in the shifting air. Faint scars glowed beneath his skin like burning constellations. He looked less like a soldier and more like a dying star that had chosen the shape of a man. His armor was ancient. No known forge of the Mechanicus could replicate its alloy. Etched upon it were symbols that defied imperial lexicon, curved runes, angular sigils, maps of constellations long since dead. The plates were fused with fragments of meteoric ore pitted by ages of battle, and at his sides rested two enormous greatswords linked by faint chains of light, still vibrating with unspent energy. The custodes recorded everything, but their data feeds burned out within seconds. Machines rebelled against the truth.
Logic circuits shut down in self-defense.
One by one, the Auspec's lenses shattered as if refusing to witness the impossible. The Crimson Warrior exhaled, a slow rumble that rippled through the air. Dust and broken rock lifted gently around him, caught in invisible orbits. His gauntleted hand flexed against the soil, leaving impressions that filled instantly with molten light, before cooling again. He whispered something, not in Low Gothic, nor in any Xeno dialect. The sound was ancient, mournful, half a name, half a memory. Those who heard it through the Vox described it as a star-dying Renala. The sound carried, stretching across the psychic ether, faint but unignorable. The psychers aboard the Eternum Vigil collapsed in unison, screaming of 1,000 skies that no longer existed. The warp itself recoiled, unable to read the gravity-born energy radiating from this being. He was not of the Immaterium. He belonged to something older, the will of creation itself. For a time, he was still. The storm of debris slowed, settling into gentle orbits. Moons moved again. The gravitational field began to calm. The custodes dared to approach, moving with reverent caution. They surrounded him, forming a ring of gold around crimson ruin. One among them, a tribune, lowered his guardian's spear and stepped forward, placing his hand to his chest in salute. His voice, low and measured, echoed through the comms. "In the name of the Emperor of mankind, state your purpose." The response came not as sound, but as a tremor through the ground, through their bones, through the ship above. The warrior's lips moved barely. His eyes opened. Twin suns ignited behind them, one red, one gold. The crater shook. Debris rose again, but this time not in chaos. It lifted in perfect, ordered patterns as though greeting their master. The custodes stumbled backward as the voice came at last, deep and resonant, echoing through the void. "Where are the stars I once held still?" Then, as the words faded, he fell silent again. The weight of his body pressed the ground into glass. The air calmed. The unnatural stillness returned, and in that silence, even the Emperor's chosen understood. This was no intruder.
No invader, no daemon. This was a god who had grown tired of being awake. For 3 days, the being did not stir.
The custodes stood their vigil upon the shifting plain, golden sentinels against an enemy they could neither name nor measure. Around them, the moons of Jupiter continued to circle in strange, silent harmony, as if held in orbit by the sleeping will of the crimson giant. But on the 4th day, everything changed. Without warning, the ground began to hum.
Instruments aboard the Eternum Vigil went blind. Every reading flatlined into white noise.
The temperature spiked and dropped in alternating waves. The faint gravity field surrounding the crater grew heavier, denser, folding space until even light began to bend inward. Then came the sound, low, endless, like the groan of a dying world. The figure moved, a ripple of force radiated outward as he inhaled for the first time in millennia. Rocks lifted from the soil and hung motionless. Entire shards of frozen moon drifted down from orbit, forming a slow spiral above him. The custodes braced themselves, locking boots into the cracked ground as the pull of gravity shifted beneath their feet. The warrior rose, his crimson armor hissing with evaporated frost. Each motion birthed a shockwave that distorted the air. His hair burned with faint light, strands of copper and ember drifting upward as if drawn toward unseen stars. For a heartbeat, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Radahn opened his eyes. The void itself seemed to ripple around him. His pupils were miniature event horizons, twin abysses swallowing light and reflection alike. In their depths burned faint echoes of entire galaxies, long dead and long mourned. The custodes raised their weapons, not in aggression, but in instinct. To face such a presence was to face the unmaking of everything they understood. Radahn looked at them, not in fear nor hostility, but confusion. The language of men was lost to him, yet his intent transcended words. A single thought brushed their minds, vast, ancient, filled with the grief of ages. Where am I? The thought alone sent ripples through the ground. The custodes staggered under the pressure of his consciousness. One fell to a knee, his armor groaning like glass under strain. Radahn turned his gaze skyward. The stars were wrong. The constellations that once obeyed him were strangers now, moved on from his command. He reached upward as though to call them back, and the heavens quivered. Jupiter's shattered moons trembled in orbit. Whole swaths of debris froze in mid-drift. Then he lowered his arm. His breath steadied. The immediate storm ceased. The fragments of rock descended once more, settling into quiet motion. The gravitational field loosened its hold, though the air remained heavy with his presence. One custodian, his voice shaking despite his training, dared to speak. "You are upon the moons of Jupiter, in the soul system of mankind." Radahn regarded him silently. He did not understand the words, but he understood tone, the solemn weight of soldiers announcing their domain. He turned his head slightly, seeing in them something familiar. Warriors, loyal, bound by code. He had been such once, the Custodes' command Vox flared. Orders from Terra: do not engage, secure perimeter, maintain observation. Radahn took a step forward. The moons groaned beneath his weight. Each stride left glowing footprints in the stone, molten and seething, yet beautiful in their symmetry. The Custodes tightened formation, but held their ground. He stopped before them. The nearest warrior's spear trembled under the invisible strain of the gravity around him. For a moment, none dared breathe. Then Radahn spoke. Not in any tongue known to man, but in resonance, his voice carried through the bones of the world itself. Stars. Gone. War. Remains. The Custodes felt it more than heard it. A truth that crossed language and faith alike. This being was no stranger to war. He had fought beneath dead skies, had seen worlds burn, until even light fled from him. In the command sanctum of the Eternum Vigil, data flooded back online. Recordings stabilized, energy signatures recalibrated, and for the first time since his fall, the machine's spirits whispered a single identification across the Vox. Lifeform, autonomous, sentient, power classification, beyond scale, designation, the Starscourge. On Terra, the Emperor felt the tremor reach his mind like the echo of a distant sun, and with quiet certainty, he knew. The being that had fallen was not chaos-born, not of the warp, not of corruption, but of the stars themselves. Radahn had awakened. On Terra, the Astronomicon pulsed once, a long, slow heartbeat that rolled across the Imperium like the echo of creation itself. Every navigator, every sanctioned psyker, every astropath froze where they stood, their minds filled with a single vision, a crimson giant walking among broken moons, light bending around him as if reality itself bowed to his will. The Emperor saw it too, from the depths of the golden throne. His consciousness stretched outward, beyond the palace, beyond the orbiting fleets, beyond even the veil of the immaterium. He saw the moons of Jupiter, fractured and still bleeding starlight. He saw the Custodes standing in silence, dwarfed by the being they surrounded. And he saw the truth beneath the spectacle, the power of gravity, the oldest law of the universe, gathered in one being's soul. It was not chaos. It was not divine. It was something older, something purer. Creation's first language, spoken again through flesh. The Emperor rose. The throne's machinery screamed as golden light poured from his form. The Custodes guarding the sanctum fell to one knee as his will filled the chamber like a storm. The order he gave was not carried by words, but by thought, sharp, absolute, divine. I go to meet him. In the silence that followed, the throne dimmed, its light burning low as if the world itself was holding its breath. Moments later, a beam of radiant energy split the skies above Terra. The Eternum Vigil received the transmission seconds before it appeared, an incoming vessel moving faster than recorded physics allowed, burning with solar brilliance. When it emerged above Jupiter's shattered orbit, its hull shone like dawn breaking through the void. Every Mechanicus sensor shorted out in reverence and terror. It was no ship built by mortal hands. It was the Emperor himself, crossing the gulf of space not as a man, but as a being of pure will and light. The custodes fell to their knees as the golden form descended through the dust, the void folding away from his presence. Even Radahn felt it. His head turned slightly, his brow furrowing, eyes narrowing as the air itself began to sing. Golden radiance touched the crater floor.
Dust lifted.
The crushed soil turned to molten glass beneath the Emperor's boots. Radahn stared, not in defiance, but curiosity. The light before him felt familiar, not in form, not in face, but in essence, purpose, command, the weight of countless lives born without complaint. It reminded him dimly of the stars he had once ruled, each bound by unseen gravity, held together by their shared burden. The Emperor stood still, his aura burning yet calm, his presence bending the warp around him into submission. He did not draw a weapon. He did not speak a threat. He merely looked upon the fallen demigod with the knowing gaze of one who had seen every kind of power. For a long moment, neither moved. Light and gravity, creation and weight, the twin forces of the cosmos met in silence. Then the Emperor spoke, not aloud, but through the air itself, not as a ruler, but as one force of nature addressing another. You are not of the warp, nor of mankind, yet you stand within my realm. Radahn's voice rolled out in answer, his words trembling through the broken moons like thunder. I am of the stars.
And they are gone. The Emperor's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly.
He saw the truth then, not a conqueror, not a destroyer, but a lost king whose war had outlived his purpose. Then perhaps the Emperor's thought rippled gently through the ether. It is time you found a new sky to command. The dust settled between them. For the first time since his fall, Radahn did not feel alone. And in that wordless understanding, the balance of the galaxy shifted. Two gods, one of light, one of gravity, stood together at the edge of eternity. The command fleets waited beyond the Jovian orbit, engines silent, guns cold.
None dared move without the Emperor's word.
Every sensor showed the same image, two figures, one gold, one crimson, standing at the heart of a crater large enough to swallow continents. Between them stretched no battlefield, no weapons, only a quiet stillness that defied the violence of the cosmos. Within the eternum vigil, the custodes remained motionless, their armor glinting in the faint red light of Jupiter's storms. Some whispered prayers to the Emperor beneath their breath, though they knew he did not need them. Others simply watched in reverence and unease, for what stood before them looked like a meeting of stars, not men. The Mechanicus, however, were not still. Deep in their data chambers, adepts screamed prayers to their machine spirits as their logic engines strained to quantify the impossible.
Every measurement was an insult to comprehension.
Radahn's body emitted no biological signals, yet his armor radiated power on a scale reserved for dying suns. His presence created distortions in gravity that spread for thousands of kilometers, shaping the orbit of debris around him into perfect mathematical spirals. The fabricator general himself appeared on the comm feed, his face hidden behind brass. "By the Omnissiah, we must contain it," he demanded. "Being of such magnitude cannot walk freely. It must be studied, sanctified, repurposed, if possible." The Custodes command officer did not respond. The Golden Warriors had already felt the Emperor's will in their minds. Containment was not the order. Observation was. On the crater below, the air shimmered between the two titans. The Emperor stood unarmed, the golden light of his armor cutting through the shadows of the broken moon. Radahn watched him, unmoving, though the gravitational pulse from his body trembled faintly, betraying his unease. For the first time since awakening, Radahn spoke again, his deep, earthborn tone vibrating through the ground like tectonic rumble. "You bear the weight of many."
The stars answer to you?
The Emperor's voice was calm, quiet, yet every syllable carried the strength of galaxies.
I bear mankind, not the stars. I command no heavens, only survival. Radahn's eyes glowed faintly as though reflecting distant constellations.
His voice was weary, filled with something ancient.
I fought for a world once, held back the sky itself. Now it burns, forgotten.
Perhaps this one will burn the same. The Emperor's gaze did not waver. And help me keep it from burning. For a moment, the universe seemed to hesitate. Jupiter's storms quieted. The dust around them stilled mid-air. The laws of nature waited for Radahn's answer. High above, the Mechanicus ships locked targeting arrays, their machine spirits trembling with both awe and fear. To them, the Crimson Giant was a resource, a weapon, an anomaly too dangerous to exist unbound. They prepared suppression fields and void cages, reciting litanies of binding. But the Emperor knew better. He could sense the will behind Radahn's immense gravity, steady, uncorrupted, bound not by hate or hunger, but by sorrow. This was not a creature of chaos or the warp. This was something untainted, something clean. The Emperor extended his hand, not in command, but invitation. The Imperium does not need another prisoner. It needs a protector. Radahn looked at that hand. For a time he said nothing. The golden light reflected against his armor, shimmering like sunrise across blood-stained steel. Then slowly, as if remembering what it meant to trust, he lowered his blades and placed his massive hand upon the Emperor's. The impact was silent, yet the stars trembled. Two forces, once opposed, now aligned. On the eternum vigil, the custodes bowed. Across the solar system, psychers gasped as the oppressive weight of gravity lessened. The warp, sensing the pact, recoiled in pain. In the void, where no sound should travel, the Emperor's words echoed like a prayer reborn. "Walk beside me, Starscourge. Together we will command the heavens once more." And as their hands joined, the crater floor began to glow, not with fire or ruin, but with light, the quiet, steady pulse of rebirth. For the first time in an age, creation itself seemed to exhale. When the Emperor and the Starscourge stood together, even the void seemed to fall silent. The weight of the moment rippled across the immaterium, echoed through the warp, like the memory of a dying star rekindled. The custodes watched from their ship in reverent stillness.
None dared to breathe.
They could not hear the words being spoken, yet their souls felt their resonance. Two wills conversing beyond sound, beyond time. The Emperor's mind opened like a sunrise, flooding Radahn's consciousness with vision. In a heartbeat, the fallen demigod saw what mankind had built, the endless sprawl of the Imperium, billions of worlds burning and rebuilding, the eternal crusade for survival against chaos and extinction. He saw triumphs forged from sacrifice, empires built on faith, and the unrelenting weight of duty that the Emperor carried alone. Radahn knelt slightly, the ground trembling beneath his massive form. He understood that burden. He had once borne his own, holding the heavens in place so his world could dream of peace. The memory of his people, long dust in another universe, flickered through his mind like dying embers. He closed his eyes, the heat of sorrow bending the air around him. "You fight against the storm," he said softly, his voice like tectonic plates grinding in reverence. "But even stars die in time. Why do you struggle so?" The Emperor's voice was neither loud nor commanding. It was steady, human, and infinite all at once. For them, for those who still believe that light, however faint, is worth protecting. Radahn looked up, meeting that golden gaze. There was no pride in it, no arrogance, only conviction. He recognized it. The same unbreakable will that had once led him to halt the cosmos itself. He rose slowly, towering above even the Emperor, yet somehow smaller in that moment, humbled not by fear, but by purpose rediscovered. "Are there still stars worth protecting?" he asked. The Emperor's light brightened, casting long shadows across the broken plains. "There are," he said, "and I would have you guard them." The silence that followed was not hesitation, but reflection. The Crimson Giant stared upward through the ruin of the Jovian moons. Once he had chained the stars to his will. Now he would defend them for another's. The purpose he had lost beyond worlds now returned, reforged in gold and flame. At last, Radahn nodded. "Then my sword is yours, Golden One, until gravity forgets to pull, and the last star burns cold." The Emperor inclined his head, a rare gesture of respect between equals. And with that the pact was sealed. The void shifted, the warp recoiled, and across the Imperium, astropaths dreamed of a crimson warrior crowned in falling meteors, walking beside a golden god. From that day onward, one name was whispered in both reverence and awe: the Starscourge of Terra. The return to Terra was unlike any procession in history. No triumph, no fanfare, no heraldic banners,
Only silence.
The being who had fallen from the heavens walked beside the Emperor beneath the light of a newborn dawn. The Mechanicus descended upon him first, and
Army of red robes and steel minds desperate
to dissect the miracle. Their senses flickered, their cogitators sang in binary hymns of awe and dread. To them, Radahn was a living engine, a creature whose mere presence defied the Omnissiah's logic. His armor bent magnetism, his blood hummed with raw, stellar energy. His body exuded gravitational pressure so precise it could fold a ship's hull without touch. They begged the Emperor to let them study him, to preserve what they called the greatest relic of the stars. But the Emperor denied them. He did not bring a relic. He had brought a soldier. Radahn was led to the forges beneath the imperial palace, the same halls where the first custodies had been armed. There, under the guidance of the fabricator general himself, his battered armor was reforged. The process took weeks. Layer by layer, the scarred plates were mended with adamantium and solar-forged alloys. Every rune from his fallen world was preserved, each engraved anew beside the sigils of the Imperium. When he emerged, he was a vision of ancient power reborn. Crimson armor trimmed in gold, twin greatswords slung across his back like the wings of a dying star. Upon his chest gleamed a new sigil, the 8-pointed burst of a comet, trailing across the heavens his oath to guard the skies of mankind. The Emperor decreed that Radahn's strength would not serve him alone. A legion would be forged in his image, not of demigods, but of men who would learn to master gravity, to command motion itself in battle. They called them the Comet Legion. Recruited from the finest regiments of the Astra Militarum, trained by the Emperor's custodies and blessed by Radahn himself, they became an army unlike any the galaxy had seen. Their armor shimmered with faint gravitational fields, allowing them to move as though unbound by weight. Their ships carried engines modified from Radahn's own teachings, capable of slingshotting through planetary orbits with precision once thought divine. Radahn stood before them on the day of their consecration, his voice echoing across the parade grounds like rolling thunder. "Men of Terra," he said, "you are bound by the same law that binds the stars, pull, purpose, and patience. The void will fear you because you will not fall." The soldiers knelt, and for the first time since his exile from his home world, Radahn felt pride, not for conquest, but for unity. From that moment, wherever the Comet Legion marched, gravity itself seemed to answer their call. Enemies who faced them found their weapons heavy, their steps sluggish, the ground pulling them down like the judgment of the stars. And at their head rode the Starscourge, no longer a fallen god, but a general reborn in gold and crimson whose power was not to rule the heavens, but to protect them. The Imperium had gained its greatest champion. The galaxy had gained its balance. But beyond the veil of the warp, something vast began to stir, watching, whispering, and fearing the day that gravity itself chose a side. For months, the Comet Legion spread across the void like a tide of rebirth. Worlds once thought lost to the darkness of the warp were reclaimed under banners of gold and crimson. On 1,000 battlefields men spoke the same word as they fought: Radahn. But the warp was watching. It began in silence. The psychic ether around the Legion's fleets grew dense, oppressive.
Astropaths screamed of unseen eyes opening within the void.
Then on the border of the ghoul stars, reality itself split apart. A wound tore open across the heavens, a rent of swirling madness and blood-red flame. From it poured demons, malformed and furious, their shrieks vibrating through the hulls of starships. They descended upon the world of Cyrath, once an imperial bastion, now twisted into a nightmare of bone and ash. Radahn led the charge. The Comet Legion followed in his wake as their transports plunged through the burning sky. The atmosphere itself recoiled from his descent. He hit the surface like a meteor, his landing shattering mountains, his arrival visible from orbit. The demons surged, rivers of teeth, wings and hate, roaring the names of their gods. The air stank of madness and rot. For the first time, Radahn faced the true face of the warp. Yet as they came, something remarkable happened. Their screams faltered. The closer they drew to the Starscourge, the weaker they became. Their limbs dragged, their wings buckled, their forms flickered in and out of existence. The warp-born abominations began to crumble under invisible pressure, collapsing into dust and fading back into the immaterium. Radahn's power tore at the foundations of their being. His gravity was not just physical, it was existential. His very presence denied their nature. Chaos could not thrive where natural law was absolute. He was the antithesis of the warp, a being of pure order, weight, and certainty. The ground split as he walked. His swords burned with molten light, each swing cleaving through demon and stone alike. He moved like a planet in motion, unstoppable, inevitable. His soldiers followed behind, emboldened by the impossible sight. When the last demon fell, silence returned. Only the whispers of the warp remained, furious and afraid. In the aftermath, the skies above Kirath cleared. The warp storm that had devoured it for centuries was gone. Not banished by faith, not burned by psychic flame, but pressed into submission by the will of a single being who had once commanded stars to halt. From Terra to the farthest reach of the segmentum solar, tales spread of the battle. The ecclesiarchy called it a miracle. The Inquisition called it an anomaly. The Emperor called it proof. Where Radahn walked, the warp recoiled, and far beyond the veil, in the screaming heart of chaos, 4 gods stirred in rage. When the storms of the warp shifted, they converged toward a single point, Cadia. Abaddon's 14th, Black Crusade had begun, his fleet blotting out the stars as it crossed the Eye of Terror. The Cadian Gate burned once more, its defenders outnumbered 100 to 1.
Titans fell, regiments vanished in flame.
The fortress world trembled under the weight of the War Master's fury, but the Imperium had a new weapon now, and a new hope. The Comet Legion arrived without fanfare, their descent marked not by fire but by silence. Whole battalions fell from orbit like shooting stars. At their head descended Radahn, encased in crimson armor that glowed like molten iron. He struck the surface in the heart of battle. Shockwaves rippled across the continent. Tanks flipped, demons disintegrated, and Chaos Marines stumbled as if gravity itself had turned against them. Abaddon's voice thundered through the warp. "Another god come to die?" Radahn looked up. His eyes burned like collapsing suns. The Black Legion advanced in fury. Demon engines possessed titans and endless hordes. The ground bled as the eye of terror pulsed overhead. Warp storms spilled across the sky, feeding the traitors with strength born of madness. Radahn answered with gravity. He lifted his blades. The stars bent. Meteors screamed down from the heavens, not summoned, but called. Fragments of moons and asteroids drawn by his command. They struck the earth in controlled impacts, carving trenches through the enemy ranks. The Comet Legion advanced behind him, unflinching. Their armor shimmered with faint gravitational halos. Bolters roared. Plasma cannons hissed. Every shot found its mark as Radahn's unseen force guided their aim. When Abaddon's war engines turned their guns toward him, Radahn simply raised his hand. The shells halted mid-air, their momentum stolen. Their weight turned inward until they collapsed into singularities, no larger than a fist. He hurled them back. Entire demon forges vanished in bursts of white fire. For 3 days, the battle raged. On the 4th, the warp screamed. The gate above Cadia twisted violently, as though recoiling from the being below. The planet's crust groaned, not in collapse, but in defiance, and when the smoke cleared, Abaddon's fleet was gone, cast into the void, scattered by a storm that was not the warps, but the stars. The Imperium rejoiced. Cadia, broken and scarred, still stood, and from that day forward, the soldiers of the Comet Legion painted their armor with the words, "The stars still hold." Radahn stood among the ruins, his gaze fixed on the wounded sky. For all his triumph, there was no joy in his expression, only quiet reflection. He had won, yes, but he had felt something in that battle, something old and familiar, and the pull of the gods, the whispers of chaos, reaching not for him, but for the hearts of men. Victory, he realized, was never the end. It was merely the pause before the next fall, and high above, unseen by mortal eyes, the warp itself trembled, not in laughter, but in fear. The news of Cadia's survival spread through the Imperium like a second dawn. Vox networks that had once carried only pleas and prayers now echoed with a single phrase: "The Starscourge has delivered us." But victory in the Imperium always carried a shadow. In the chambers of the Senatorum Imperialis, the High Lords gathered beneath the vast mural of the Emperor's ascension. Incense choked the air, banners of gold hung motionless. Each lord sat behind layers of guards and secrecy, their faces half hidden by robes and data veils. Radahn's name had reached even here, and it frightened them. The Fabricator General began first, his voice a measured chant. "His power is not of this realm. He bends gravity as if it were silk. No Mechanicus engine can measure him. We cannot control what we cannot comprehend." The Grand Provost Marshal slammed his gauntlet against the table. "He destroyed demon forges and shattered warp storms. Should we not praise that?" The Ecclesiarch raised a jeweled hand. and yet the masses worship him already. There are pilgrims who chant his name before the emperors, entire sects forming around the belief that he is the star savior, the son of divine light. Faith diverted is faith betrayed. Silence followed. The Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum spoke next, her tone quiet, clinical. An entity of that magnitude cannot be left unchecked. He may not be of chaos, but he is not of man. His will could break the balance the Emperor built. Around the table, suspicion spread like a contagion. Every lord saw in Radahn what they feared most, an uncontrolled power that rendered them irrelevant. The custodes served the Emperor directly. The Primarchs were myths, but Radahn was real, walking among mortals, commanding legions, reshaping battlefields. They whispered of containment protocols, of psychic wards, of ways to bind or banish him.
None dared say it aloud, but the thought was there. What if he turns?
On Terra's lower levels, among the people, the opposite occurred. Statues of Radahn appeared beside shrines to the Emperor. Soldiers of the Astra Militarum painted the comet sigil upon their armor. In the underhives, starving masses prayed to the Red
Titan, believing he carried the Emperor's
light into the stars. The Inquisition grew.
Restless, every faction wanted him or wanted him.
Gone, but Radahn noticed none of this. He spent his time in the silent halls of the Imperial Palace, away from the crowds, his eyes fixed upon the heavens. He did not kneel to the Emperor, nor stand against him. He simply was, a being out of time, neither man nor God, yet carrying the weight of both. The Emperor, ever patient, allowed it. He alone understood the burden of divinity. He alone saw the quiet restraint in Radahn's heart. And though no mortal could hear their thoughts, one truth passed silently between them. Power without faith is dangerous. Faith without control is worse. Beyond the walls of the palace, the whispers of the warp began to grow louder. The ruinous powers had taken notice, not just of Radahn's victories, but of his doubts, for even stars in their glory can burn too bright for the world that holds them. In the black heart of the Immaterium, the Chaos Gods convened. Their realm was a wound in reality, a storm of thought and hunger, laughter and pain, all at once. And at its center, 4 immense presences turned their gaze toward the same point in space. Khorne's roar was the first to break the silence. Another warrior dares to claim dominion over battle.
He slaughters my demons without bloodlust, kills without rage. I will have his skull for my throne.
Tzeentch's laughter followed, 1,000 overlapping voices whispering contradictions. You see only the blade, old fool.
I see the pattern.
This one's power bends law itself. He is not a creature of the warp, yet he wounds it. A paradox, a flaw in creation. Imagine what I could make of him. Nurgle's chuckle was low, warm, and endless. Ah, but he endures, doesn't he? Rot has touched him before. It could touch him again.
All things decay, even stars.
Especially stars, and Slaanesh, smooth and venomous, purred from the shadows.
Do you not feel it?
That endless sorrow buried beneath his might. Such exquisite despair. He misses what was. He longs for a home that no longer exists. I could give him beauty again, the perfection of purpose. Their arguments rose and clashed, forming storms that shredded lesser demons. Across the warp, visions flared. Endless possibilities of corruption, temptation, and war. And then all fell still. A new voice, older than the rest, drifted through the madness. None of you will take him, it said. The gods turned. In the depths of the warp, something vast stirred. The remnants of forgotten entities.
Ancient forces that predated even the pantheon of chaos. It was gravity itself.
The echo of creation's first rule. "You cannot have him," the voice repeated, calm and unyielding. "He belongs to the weight that binds you." The Chaos gods recoiled, furious, their power rippling outward. But the statement had truth, undeniable, immutable. Still they were patient. If they could not possess the Starscourge, they could wound him, and so they sent whispers, soft, tempting, poisonous, through the dreams of the weak, through the flicker of warp light. They reached for him, they showed him images of his past, a dead mother's voice, a broken kingdom, the silent bodies of his people drifting through starlight. They showed him the emperor sitting upon his golden throne, unmoving, unfeeling. A mirror of every god who had ever demanded sacrifice. They did not demand, they offered. "You fought for love once, Radahn.
You fought for your people.
Fight again. Not for him, but for yourself." In the stillness of his chamber on Terra, Radahn awoke from restless sleep, his breath heavy, his eyes dim. The stars beyond his window felt farther. For the first time since his arrival, the gravity around him faltered, and in that single tremor, the warp smiled. Terra never slept, yet in the deep hours of its night, the world seemed quieter, almost respectful of the weight that pressed upon its protector. The stars hung distant and pale beyond the smog-choked sky, veiled by the restless glow of orbital defenses and pollution. And there, in one of the palace's highest spires, the Starscourge stood alone. Radahn's crimson armor reflected faint starlight through the obsidian glass. His helm rested at his feet, his face drawn in silence. In the void beyond the window, the stars felt wrong. Too dim, too far. In his home world, the heavens had danced to his command. They had obeyed him, loved him. Now they were strangers, cold lights that no longer sang his name. He closed his eyes, trying to recall their warmth, and instead saw ruin, the lands between. His mother's moon shattered, his father's war, the endless cycle of pride and madness that had devoured his world. He had fought for them all, until the rot claimed his mind, until his name became a legend of pity. He had fallen then, not to defeat, but to grief. Now he stood whole again, but for what? The Emperor had given him purpose, but not peace. Humanity praised him, worshipped him even, but their faith was hollow, born of fear and ignorance. They saw him as a god made of iron and flame, not as a warrior bound by sorrow. They did not know his heart still ached for a sky that no longer existed. He spoke softly, though no one was there to hear him. "Once I held back the stars to save a world that was already dying. What am I saving now?" The words hung in the air, heavy as his own gravity. The door behind him opened with a hiss of sanctified air. A custodian entered, bowing his head. His armor glowed faintly in the dim light. "My Lord Starscourge, the Emperor calls for rest. The campaigns have ended. There is peace for now." Radahn did not turn. "Peace," he repeated, the word foreign, almost bitter. "A lie told between wars." The custodian hesitated, unsure how to answer. Radahn finally looked at him, eyes burning like dying suns. "Tell me, Guardian of Gold, has peace ever lasted in your Emperor's time?" The custodian's silence was answer enough. When he left, Radahn remained motionless, watching the faint shimmer of satellites drift through the upper atmosphere. His reflection in the glass looked almost human, and for the first time since his awakening, that frightened him. He was no longer the warrior of the stars. He was a weapon in the hands of an empire that did not understand him. The gods of the warp whispered to him in dreams, showing visions of the Emperor's throne cracking, of humanity kneeling before the same idol that had enslaved his people in another life. He did not believe them. Yet he could not unsee the truth in their words. The Emperor was not cruel, but he was unyielding. He demanded loyalty, not understanding. And Radahn, who had once been a general, a son, a god of gravity, now felt the pull of a new kind of weight, doubt. He wondered if he had simply traded one throne for another. That night, he descended from the palace and rode Leonard, his tiny, spectral horse, through the silent deserts beyond the walls of Terra. The gravity around him softened, the dust rising to meet his hooves in slow, swirling spirals. There, under the choking smog, he looked up at the sky and whispered to the darkness, "I do not serve the stars.
I am their sorrow." His voice carried through the thin air like thunder.
And far beyond, in the endless warp, 4 gods listened and smiled, for they had seen it, the first crack in the armor of the Starscourge. He did not yet know it, but gravity was no longer the only thing that pulled at him. Mars had always been a world of flame and faith, its skies red with ash, its cities built upon the worship of the machine. Every breath of its people was a prayer to logic, to function, to the divine order of metal and fire. When Radahn first stepped upon its surface, the forges went silent in awe. The machine's spirits trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. Here was a being who did not bend the laws of physics. He was their living embodiment. To the Mechanicus that made him kin to the Omnissiah himself. To others, it made him blasphemy. In the years following the victory at Cadia, Radahn visited Mars often. He worked beside the tech priests, curious about their craft, patient in their rituals. He taught them to harness gravity not as a weapon, but as a tool, to forge alloys with pressure instead of flame, to construct floating cities that drank sunlight directly. To the common adepts he was a revelation. To the higher ranks he was a threat. The Fabricator General watched him closely. Each lesson, each discovery, undermined centuries of Mechanicus dogma. The Forge Lords whispered that Radahn's knowledge came not from the Omnissiah, but from some rival god, a heretic deity of matter and motion. Yet they could not deny his miracles. Until one day they tried to claim them. It began as an experiment, or so they told him, a joint project between the Comet Legion's engineers and Mars's Archmagos Gravitas to study the source of his power. They said they only wanted to understand the field that emanated from his body, the unseen well of energy that bent space and drew light to him. Radahn, ever trusting, agreed. He entered the forge lab at Olympus Mons, the largest sanctum on Mars, its ceiling so vast it resembled a hollow world. Red light bathed the chamber. Thousands of cables coiled like serpents from brass consoles. The air thrummed with hymns of calculation. He stepped into the center of the machine, and the doors sealed. At first, there was only the hum of containment fields. Then the pain began. Electrostatic chains coiled around his limbs, glowing with holy circuitry. Runes of confinement burned across the floor, weaving patterns of impossible geometry. The machine priests chanted, their metallic voices rising to fevered pitch. Divine equation, reveal thy secret.
We claim the power of the fallen star.
Radahn's roar shook the forge. His gravity field surged, snapping cables and crushing servitors like paper. The chamber walls bent inward under the strain. Tech priests screamed as their augmetics imploded, their metal bones crushed by their own weight. The Fabricator General stood at the control dais, his mechanical eyes wide with terror.
"Contain him!"
he shouted, but there was no containment. The crimson light turned white as the pressure spiked beyond measure. The reactor beneath Olympus Mons collapsed into itself, not in explosion, but implosion. Entire sections of the mountain folded inward, compressed into a singular sphere no larger than a seed. When the dust cleared, the forge lab was gone. In its place lay a crater of perfect glass, smooth as a mirror. Floating at its center was Radahn. His armor was fractured, smoke curling from its seams. His face, when it lifted toward the surviving tech priests, was not wrathful. It was disappointed. "You tried to take what was given," he said, voice heavy with sorrow. "You tried to bind gravity itself, Woody, and forgot what it means to fall." He opened his hand. The glass crater rippled outward in a shock wave of reversed gravity. Every machine, every forge, every steel tower for miles rose into the air, hung there for a moment in silent reverence, and then fell, obliterating everything beneath. Mars burned for 3 days. The Mechanicus sent pleas for mercy across the void. The Emperor heard them, but Radahn had already left. He did not flee, he simply walked into the desert, his armor scorched, his soul heavy. Behind him, the once great forge world smoldered, its cities reduced to embers, its forges silent for the first time in 10,000 years. The Fabricator General's last transmission echoed across the void before his fortress fell. The star god cannot be contained. Pray he never falls again. When Radahn returned to Terra, his cape was torn, his steps slow. The custodies met him in silence and bowed their heads. And far above, upon the golden throne, the Emperor opened his eyes. There would be no rebuke, no trial, no condemnation, only the quiet understanding that the stars themselves had limit, and that even gods could break
under the weight of their own sorrow. And
the message reached Terra, the ruins of Mars burning red. Against the void, the Imperium trembled. Entire sectors fell silent in dread. To the priests and nobles of mankind, Mars was not merely a planet. It was the beating heart of the Imperium's soul. For the first time in 10 millennia, that heart had stopped. And at the center of the storm stood one being. Not a demon, not a Xenos, but their savior. The High Lords demanded punishment. The Ecclesiarchy called for excommunication. The Inquisition whispered the word extermination. But none of them could act. For the Starscourge did not kneel before their banners. He knelt before only one. When Radahn entered the throne chamber, the air itself bent under his presence. The golden halls of the imperial palace, built to withstand titans, trembled with each step. Custodies lined the path, silent, their halberds lowered.
not as a threat, but as respect. The doors closed behind him.
The sound echoed like the toll of a dying star. The Emperor sat upon the golden throne, a monument of light and agony, bound to the machinery that sustained his eternal will.
Even the air vibrated with his presence, a pressure that pressed upon the soul like divine gravity. Radahn stopped before the dais.
His armor was scorched and cracked. His eyes, once burning with solar fire, were dim. For a long moment neither spoke, then softly, almost like a memory, the Emperor's voice filled the chamber. "You burned Mars." Radahn bowed his head.
They tried to cage me.
To cage what should never be bound.
I warned them. I spared who I could. The Emperor's eyes, glowing like the sun behind storm clouds, regarded him in silence.
"Do you believe mercy excuses the ruin you wrought?" Radahn's voice was steady but heavy with sorrow. "I did not act from anger.
I acted from truth."
They worship machines more than life. They called themselves divine but forgot what divinity costs. I reminded them. The throne chamber shook, not from rage but from the weight of the Emperor's thought. "You speak as though you are judge and executioner alike." "I am neither," Radahn said quietly.
I am a consequence, the Emperor rose.
The act itself was a storm. The custodes bowed low, their armor rattling.
Even the marble beneath the throne cracked. He descended the dais, each step a pulse of golden light that made Radahn's armor hum with resonance.
When he stopped before the Starscourge, the two stood face to face, god and godlike, sun and star. "You are not my enemy," the Emperor said. "You have done what mortals cannot. You have carried burdens they cannot comprehend. But you must understand this. The Imperium survives not through strength, but through obedience.
Order is its blood.
Defiance, even righteous, poisons it." Radahn lifted his gaze. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "And if obedience demands the death of truth? If the order you build turns to tyranny while you sit upon this throne?" For the first time in an age, the Emperor's expression softened. He placed a golden hand upon Radahn's shoulder, not in command, but in kinship. "Then I will need one strong enough to destroy even me." The words struck Radahn harder than any blade. For a moment, he saw the truth in them. The Emperor did not rule for power. He ruled because no one else could bear it. And yet, he knew one day he might need to fall, not to ruin, but to rebirth. "Then you would make me executioner of gods?" Radahn asked. The Emperor's gaze turned distant, as though seeing a future only he could witness. "I would make you the proof that power can still choose compassion." Silence filled the hall. At last, Radahn knelt, not in submission, but in solemn understanding. The gravity around him eased. The gold light of the throne dimmed to a softer glow. When he rose, the Emperor spoke once more.
"I go, the Imperium will call you traitor.
"The Mechanicus will curse your name. Let them. Serve not their voices, but the one that speaks within you," Radahn bowed. "I will, my lord. But I fear the stars are not done moving." As he turned to leave, the Emperor's voice followed him, quiet, tired, almost human. "They never are, my son. They never are." Outside the chamber, the skies above Terra bled crimson. The warp storms were stirring again, and this time they did not whisper his name in fear, they sang it in invitation. In the void beyond the Sol system, the warp stirred like a living sea. Its currents swelled with voices, some ancient, some newly born. Those who sailed near it heard a new hymn ripple through the tides of unreality. A low and mournful chant carried upon the winds of madness. It had no words, only rhythm, gravity, and sorrow. The daemons called it the Song of the Falling Star. Every astropath in the Imperium heard it in their dreams. Some described it as music, others as a heartbeat. A few, those most sensitive to the warp's whispers, spoke of something worse, a gravity that pulled the soul itself. At first, it was dismissed as psychic echo, a lingering scar from the destruction
On Mars, but when entire navigator houses went blind, seeing only spirals of collapsing suns, the
truth became harder to deny. The song was alive. It began at the edges of the Eye of Terra, spreading outward, rippling across systems faster than any warp current. Wherever it passed, the veil between real space and the immaterium trembled. Worlds near the maelstrom experienced impossible phenomena, moons falling upward, oceans turning to dust, cities floating miles above the surface before disintegrating into the void. In the warp itself, the gods watched. Khorne raged, hurling his skulls into the churning crimson tide.
"He steals the blood from battle."
"He drains my domain with his gravity." Tzeentch only smiled, his many faces whispering. "Not steals, changes. He is no longer bound by their emperor's chain, nor by ours. His gravity reaches through the warp, bending it, sculpting it."
"He makes order from madness. A sin no god should commit." Nurgle's laughter oozed through the rot.
"All things fall, even order."
Let him play.
Let him pull the gods themselves into his pit. When he breaks, his despair will feed me. And Slanesh cooed softly, eyes half-lidded. Listen closer.
That song, it is not war. It is mourning. He grieves for what he destroyed. Such longing.
Such exquisite loneliness.
I could make him sing forever. The four gods bickered, but the warp storm only deepened.
Through it all, the song continued, a pulse that rippled across galaxies, synchronizing with the heartbeats of billions. It reached Radahn even as he slept aboard his flagship, the Graviton's Oath, drifting between stars. The sound filled his mind, not as music, but as memory. He saw a red sky above Caelid. He saw his mother, Renala, gazing at the stars she once commanded. He saw his loyal horse, Leonard, trotting beside him in a field long turned to ash. And then he saw them fall, one by one, burning into nothing. He awoke with a start. The air in his chamber vibrated with invisible tension. His armor floated a few inches above the deck, drawn by forces that obeyed no command. "Radahn!" came a voice from the shadows. It was not the Emperor. Not a man, not a daemon. It was the warp itself, whispering through form and memory, wearing the voices of the ones he had loved and lost. Why do you serve a dying god? Why save a species that fears you? You could make your own Imperium. You could pull the stars into your orbit again. Radahn stood, his jaw set, his gravity field surging around him. The metal walls groaned and bent. I have no throne.
I have no gods. I serve because I choose to. The voice laughed, 1,000 echoes overlapping like ripples on a black sea.
You speak of choice, yet you still obey him. Even now you guard his fragile world while he rots upon his machine. You are no savior, Starscourge.
You are his shadow. The light flickered. Shadows coiled.
The voice changed, softer now, tender, almost familiar.
Come home, my son, it was her voice.
Renala's. For a heartbeat, the gravity around him faltered. The stars outside his viewport blurred. Tears, rare and bright as starlight, welled in his eyes. Then, with a voice that shook the heavens, he answered, "My home is gone." And the warp screamed in fury. Across the fleet, alarms blared as gravitational fields spiked beyond control. Ships drifted out of formation, drawn toward the flagship like dust to a collapsing star. Tech priests begged for mercy from their machine spirits, but there was none. The song of the warp had found its anchor, and it was him. For the first time, Radahn felt the pull not as something he commanded, but as something that commanded him. The gods had found his sorrow, and sorrow was heavier than gravity. The void above the segmentum solar had never known such silence. Then, without warning, the flagship Graviton's Oath began to sing. Its hull, miles long, resonated with a low, trembling hum that shook every bulkhead and soul aboard. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was gravitational, a sound felt in the bones rather than heard in the ears. Crewmen screamed as their bodies lifted from the decks, drawn upward by invisible tides. Servitors malfunctioned in chorus, their metal limbs curling inward, crushed under unseen weight.
Vox channels erupted in static as bridge officers shouted over alarms that had no meaning. Mass fluctuation, unreadable. Hull integrity collapsing in on itself. Captain, the engines are bending!
And at the heart of the chaos stood Starscourge Radahn, unmoving. He was at the center of the storm, his red cape floating around him as though caught in the current of a dead star. The song that had haunted his dreams now filled the ship entire, a symphony of grief and gravity. His eyes glowed with faint, violet light, the telltale hue of the warp bleeding through real space. He could feel it. the warp's fingers pressing against his soul, pulling, tempting, whispering release. He had resisted the gods, denied their lures, but the voice that called to him now was softer, familiar. It was not Khorne or Tzeentch or any demon at all. It was something older, buried deep in the dust of the lands between, something that had once called him child. Radahn, the voice echoed, tender, mournful. Why do you fight the stars themselves? Let go. Drift, as you were meant to. For a moment, he wanted to. He saw flashes, his fallen kingdom, his mother weeping beneath shattered moons, the stars above him dancing before fading forever. The ache in his chest grew unbearable. He closed his eyes. His control faltered. Across the fleet, the effects were instant. The Graviton's Oath became the center of a singularity. Ships that had accompanied him, cruisers, escorts, transports, were dragged from their paths, twisting toward him in spirals of light. Thousands of lives screamed into the void as their hulls buckled and imploded under cosmic pressure. The void rippled. The warp answered. A rift tore open beside the dying flagship, spilling demons like blood from a wound. They emerged in shrieking flocks, their bodies made of smoke and memory, their claws dripping with unreality. And yet, even they hesitated, for what they saw was not prey, but a god in agony. Radahn roared. The sound tore through both realms at once. The gravitational storm inverted. The singularity that had begun to form began collapsing outward. Ships that had been drawn in were thrown away, tumbling into the abyss like sparks from a forge. The demons screamed as their essence was crushed by forces they could not defy. The bridge dissolved around him. The glass viewports shattered. Reality warped, the stars beyond bending and distorting into impossible patterns. Radahn fell to one knee, his breath heavy, his armor cracking under its own pressure. The voice whispered again, quieter now, more insistent.
You cannot hold them all forever, my son, not even you.
The stars must fall, his hands clenched into fists.
Then they will fall with me. He drove both hands into the floor of the collapsing ship. Every ounce of power that remained within him surged outward in one blinding pulse.
The shockwave annihilated the Graviton's Oath, turning metal, flesh, and demon alike into radiant particles. The warp rift snapped shut, sealing the wound in space, and then nothing. Silence returned. The fleet was gone. Only drifting debris remained, a slow ring of dust orbiting the point where the flagship had once been. From Terra, the astronomers of the Adeptus Mechanicus watched in awe. Their sensors recorded the impossible, an event horizon forming and then vanishing. A gravitational echo spread through the solar system, touching every moon and world before fading into deep space. For weeks the Imperium searched.
No trace of Radahn, no wreckage of his armor, no body, no light.
Only the faint hum of warped gravity that came and went like the echo of a heartbeat. In the vaults of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor sat in silence. The golden light around him dimmed slightly, as though something unseen had passed from his reach. At last, he spoke to no one and everyone. "He has not fallen," he murmured. "He has gone where even I cannot walk." And across the void, far beyond the edges of the known galaxy, the remnants of the Graviton's Oath drifted in darkness. Among them, a single spark of crimson light pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat waiting to return. The stars, for the briefest of moments, seemed to pause again, and somewhere beyond them the Starscourge slept, not dead, not gone, merely waiting for gravity's call once more. Far beyond the spiral arms of the galaxy, past even the reach of the Astronomican's light, There exists a region of darkness that no warp map records, a silence so absolute that even demons fear to enter. It is not a system, nor a nebula, but an emptiness between realities. There, in the eternal dark, something drifts.
Something vast.
The remnants of the Graviton's oath glide silently through the black. Their hull fragments, fused into impossible shapes by gravity's will, orbit a single point of faint red luminescence. Within that scarlet glow, folded inside layers of compressed starlight, sleeps Starscourge Radahn. He does not float as a corpse. He hangs suspended in a sphere of stillness, neither living nor dead. His crimson armor is fractured but whole. His cape drifts slowly in a current that does not exist. And beneath the cold shell of battle steel, his heart still beats. Slow, steady, like the pulse of a dying universe refusing to fade. The gravity field surrounding him bends the rules of the cosmos. Time does not flow here. The stars beyond seem frozen, their light halted at the edge of his domain. The warp itself recoils from the boundary, not in fear, but in awe. For within the infinite sea of madness, Radahn has created a place of absolute order. He dreams, and in his dreams he walks once more under skies of crimson and gold. The lands between are alive again, their fields lush, their skies filled with constellations that move at his command. Leonard trots beside him, loyal and small, his hooves making no sound on the starlit soil. Above them, the stars bow low, orbiting his will, forming circles of light that sing his name in the old tongue. But even in this dream, there is shadow. The song that once lured him still echoes faintly at the edge of hearing. It calls not to his strength, but to his sorrow. "Wake, my son," the voice murmurs through his slumber. Stars are weeping again. He sees flashes. The Emperor upon his throne. Humanity burning in its own wars. The warp consuming worlds. The galaxy turning to ash. He feels their gravity tugging at him across the void, not of mass, but of fate. The Imperium calls for its lost savior, and still he does not wake. For in this place beyond time, Radahn has found the one thing denied to all gods and kings: peace.
No war, no command, no burden, only stillness.
But peace, even for gods, is never eternal. From the edges of his domain, ripples begin to spread. Small at first, like stones dropped into a lake, then stronger, deeper, resonating through the dark. The light around his body flickers. The air hums with energy. Reality trembles. Someone has found him. A voice pierces the silence, not soft this time, but forged of will and light. Radahn, the Imperium bleeds. The stars cry your name. Golden light breaks through the void.
A figure steps from the radiance, vast, luminous, and unyielding.
His presence fills the silence, bending even Radahn's gravity in deference. The Emperor of mankind has come. Radahn's eyes open. Red light floods the dark, scattering the shadows that dared linger. For a moment, the void itself hesitates, unsure whether to bow or flee. "I told you once," Radahn says, his voice echoing like the birth of a galaxy. "The stars will move again," the Emperor nods, eyes burning with divine resolve. "Then let them move for mankind." The gravity field collapses outward. The wreckage of the Graviton's oath rises from the void, drawn back into shape, reforged by sheer will. Broken stars are pulled into orbit. The emptiness hums with life again, and from the darkness beyond creation, the Starscourge returns, a comet reborn, blazing crimson and gold across the galaxy. Psychers fall to their knees as the sky splits with light. The warp howls in protest, yet even it must yield to his return. The stars shift once more, not in chaos, but in harmony, on terror. The golden figure on the throne opens his eyes fully, and the Astronomicon burns brighter than it has in millennia, and as that red light streaks toward the heart of mankind, the galaxy whispers a single name that will echo through eternity. Radahn, the star that would not die. The void closes behind him. The song fades, but the stars begin to move again. In the endless dark, stories like this still burn. So stay with the light and subscribe for more tales of gods, war, and the worlds between.